On this prequel episode, we've got our Bourne Identity follow-up fan polls. We're learning about Posthumous publication and previewing Radio Free Albemuth. Hello and welcome back to This Film's Lit podcast, where we're talking about movies that are based on books. It's another prequel week, and we got a lot to get into, so let's get right into it with our patron shoutouts. We have 4 new patrons this week. Well, 3 new ones and 1 who upgraded their pledge. First up, upgrading from the $2 Newbery Medal award-winning level to the $5 Hugo award-winning level, and thus unlocking our bonus content is Gary French. Thank you, Gary. New at the $5 Hugo award-winning level, we have Lucy T, Pat, and then at the $15 Academy Award-winning level, we have Ben Wilcox. Thank you all so very much for signing on and signing up over at patreon.com/thisfilmislit. We just put out a new episode, a new bonus content episode where we discussed Shadow and Bone, the Netflix series, compared it to the book series. It's not like a full, I mean, it's about as long as a normal episode, but it's not, you know.
It's not our usual
we don't have the format. Segments and stuff, and I definitely dominated the conversation in that one because I had read all the books and everything and just had more opinions than you did on that.
Well, I told you to drive, so.
Yes. Yeah, you said you go, and I was like, okay, I will. But we discussed Shadow and Bone and our feelings on the first season and its comparison to the books, etc., and made some predictions on where we thought it might be going from there. Well, I made those predictions again. You haven't read any of the books past the first one, so. But you can check that out over at patreon.com/thisfilmislit. As always, we have our Academy Award winning patrons, and they are the newly joining their ranks, Ben Wilcox. And then our old guard, Jeff Niederhofer, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Youngs, Gratch, Just Scratch, Shelby Says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter. I'm looking forward to voting Ron Johnson out of office, and Alina Doletkalova. I don't remember who Ron Johnson is, but it sounds bad.
He's a Republican congressman, which is...
In what state?
Wisconsin, I want to say.
That sounds right. Sounds like Ron Johnson.
I also looked him up when I saw this new name because I recognized the name, but I wasn't sure what horrible person he was. Yeah. So
did he do anything specific, or is he just
I think most recently he spread a lot of COVID misinformation.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Lovely. Fantastic. Well, there you go.
Just what we need. I am also looking forward to you voting Ron Johnson out of office.
Yes, agreed. Go get him. All right, that is going to do it for our patron shout-outs. We're going to get into now our fan poll follow-up for the Bourne Identity.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Okay, let me take a drink because we have a lot of comments.
I don't remember seeing this many, and then there was a lot.
There were also more than I remembered when I started going back and looking. I was like, oh, we did actually get a lot of feedback. So on Facebook, we had 2 votes for the book and 4 votes for the movie. The poll has not actually ended because Facebook is the worst and changed my end time again. But that was the count as of earlier today when I started making up these notes. We do have a couple comments. Jennifer said, I detest the spy genre fairly passionately, but what I really like is stories involving amnesia or memory loss. I always felt like a big theme of this movie was what makes you fundamentally you. Is your moral compass dependent on your memories and sense of self, or do you become someone new? Movie Jason appears, at least to me, to worry he is a bad guy, or he has been a bad guy, or will have to become a bad guy to save himself. I feel like he had a sense of his rescue about who he was and everything he learns that shakes his assumptions and sense of self. There's comfort in finding out who you aren't, you aren't who you thought you were, and if you can't rely on or even trust yourself, what's left? I do remember noping out of reading the book a few years ago, only a few pages in, because I could already tell I was not the intended target demographic. But I honestly can't remember if it was too much 70s or too much spy that put me off. So I chose the movie because I like the action fun, I find the action fun, the CIA stuff tolerable, and the characters generally likable. I would watch it over and over.
There you go. Interesting. Yeah, we didn't really get into the discussions about like identity and stuff, and what it means. If you lose your memory, are you still essentially that same person? Because that can get into a lot of things in terms of like even things like far flung sort of sci-fi future stories about like if there's a way like if somebody's a criminal, does crimes of whatever sort. And there's something we can do where we literally go into their brain and like, bloop, cross a few wires and flick a few switches, and then they don't do that anymore. That idea of like, is it the morality of that, the morality of them being, it gets really interesting and complicated. And so if he doesn't remember and he has no inclination at that point to do any bad things anymore, does he get thrown in jail? For the crimes he has already committed? He has literally no possible again, assuming some sort of advanced super science or something that like says absolutely he's not gonna be a repeat criminal or anything. I
think it is a good kind of thematic analysis of the story. This idea of like your sense of self. Interestingly, I would say that it's probably a stronger theme present in the book than it is in the movie.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, I would imagine we get a little bit more insight into him in the book, into his thoughts and stuff.
For sure.
In the movie. I mean, it's definitely there in the movie too, because you definitely, there are lines that allude to that idea, but it's definitely just more of a sort of an action thrill ride. But yeah, cool.
Charlene said, "It's probably been 10 years since I read the book or watched the movie. I've been meaning to reread it for a while, but it wasn't going to happen before your episode. So for now, I'm sticking up for the book. I thought the book did a better job at the psychological stuff. I really felt lost with the character. I also liked the extra wrinkle of the Kane persona. I suspect I'd have a lower tolerance today for some of the of its time issues, though. So whenever I get around to that reread, I may change my mind." Interesting.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where, there's lots of stuff that even just a short time ago, I think a lot of us have. Yeah. We're less aware of, and we talk about this a lot, but we're less aware of things that definitely were of its time, and going back to them can be sort of jarring.
Yeah, for sure.
And there wasn't anything particularly of its time about the movie in terms of, you know what I mean? There was not any like regressive ideas that we've gone like, woof, we don't say that anymore or do that. You know what I mean? Like at least there's nothing that jumps out in my memory. So I think the movie generally holds up pretty well.
And I think Charlene was the only person to stick up for the book.
To defend the book, right?
Thank you, Charlene. And Kelly, who was our Academy Award winner patron who requested the Bourne identity. Kelly said, "I love the spy thriller genre. I love Robert Ludlum as an author. I love this book. But I chose the movie this time. And here's why. While I love all those other things, I fanatically love movies with ridiculous action sequences that exist just because they can. It's why the Fast and the Furious movies are my biggest guilty pleasure. This movie feeds that need in me in a way the book doesn't, even as much as I adore it. As evidenced by the car chase chapter in Midnight Sun, action is hard to convey on the written page. You have to feel it entirely. Plus, the movie has Julia Stiles, and the book doesn't. Although Katie wasn't as enamored with the movie or the source material as I am, I appreciate you doing the episode."
Fantastic. Well, thank you for recommending it. It was a lot of fun to watch and talk about. We did one of the things we realized upon, and we can address it now, after recording the episode and putting it out and everything, we had done a social post that was like, is Julia Stiles' character in the movie? And then we never discussed it. No, I mean, I guess by implication, or was her character in the book? And it just never came up. Didn't even think about it. I think by omission, you can kind of assume maybe she wasn't in the book, but she's not. Yeah. So there you go.
I can't speak to the million Bourne sequels,
right, but not in the.
But she's book. Not in the first book.
Yeah. Yep.
Sometimes I remember to tell you that I did those tease posts.
I saw that. Like I the posts go through my feed every now and then as I'm scrolling through them, and I saw that. I just forgot about it.
So on Twitter, we had 1 vote for the book and 10 votes for the movie. Ian from Wine Country, he/him, said, I loved both the book and the movie, but for wildly different reasons. The book had the old school slow burn spy drama, while the movie, having Matt Damon be calmly and confusedly badass, gave us a newer, more realistic spy action adventure for the 2000s. I'm picking the movie. I also always like to describe the adaptation as being like a spy with no memory named Jason Bourne is the only common element, which is not wrong.
Not entirely wrong, yeah.
Matt Nelson, large cartoonist at large, said, I'll admit to being not much of a fan of spy fiction, but reading this book was so boring. The movie was much more entertaining.
Well, we applaud you soldiering through. Well, although you didn't say you made it all the way through the book, so maybe you dropped out.
It's a pretty long book. I wouldn't blame anyone for dropping out.
If you gave it a go and then we're like, woof. Yeah, because it was a long one for sure.
It was a long one. Jesse said, I haven't read this Bourne book, but I tried another in the series, and wow, did that not work. I thought if I was familiar with the character, it would be fine, but I was completely lost while also a bit bored. I'm going to say these stories work better as movies. P.S. Just to be a little actually, Matt Damon was named People's Sexiest Man Alive back in 2007. And I thought that as soon as you said it in the episode, I was like, I bet he
chances
was.
Are that yeah, fair enough. Like big enough name actors that usually cycle through there at some point. And again, he's not unattractive. He's just not like Brad Pitt. Like to me, I don't know. Like he's just less like I don't know. Uniquely attractive as some of those movie stars are.
There's not a male version of it. He's like the girl next door. Yeah. Kind of. He's the boy next door. Yeah. He's not Brad Pitt. Right. But you wouldn't kick him out either.
No. Again, he's a very handsome, like it's very symmetrical face. He's very handsome. I'm just, like to me, I don't think of him as sexy so much as just like, that's a handsome guy, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. But good for him. What was 2007? What would have come out? I mean, Bourne was a few years.
Yeah, he was still doing Bourne movies in 2007.
I wonder if there was something else around there. But yeah, because I mean, that was in the middle of all the Bourne sequels and stuff. I'm just wondering if there was something else that, who knows? Anyways, interesting. The Departed was right before that, 2006. Okay. So that would be another one. Maybe him doing the Boston accent worked. I think he has a Boston accent.
That did it for people.
Yeah.
All right. Shelby Suderman said, I preferred the book's opening where we get 2 characters we don't know in a fight and we follow one of them as he goes overboard. I know it's one of those things that can be really hard to do without overwhelming your reader, but I enjoyed it. I also preferred the book's plot of a spy undercover as an assassin to catch another assassin who then loses his memory. There's a lot of potential there, and I was disappointed that the movie disregarded it. I think it was a clever nod to the book to make Bourne compassionate about kids in the movie, because we find out late in the book that he lost a wife and child to violence, which is what led him down the path he was on when he lost his memory. All that said, I'm giving it to the movie because I liked the characters better, and it was shorter and less repetitive than the book.
Yeah. That's similar stuff, but also some contradicting opinions, because you preferred the movies opening.
Yeah, I preferred the movies open.
Yep.
Lucy T. said, I read the book around when the movie came out, found it heavy going from what I remember. The movie was just fun.
There you go.
And Patrick Wood said, the Bourne movies were some of my favorite action movies growing up, so naturally I tried to read the book in high school, but gave up about 1/3 of the way through because I found Bourne's personality and his treatment of Marie and their growth of the growth of their relationship so off-putting.
Wow, look at this woke little high schooler out here not tolerating this in his novel.
My favorite aspect of these movies is how the chaotic handheld style adds to the intensity of the situations while managing to keep the action scenes clear and comprehensible, although the 2 car chases at the end of Supremacy and Ultimatum get a little messy and hard to follow.
I don't remember those movies very well. Like I said, I know I've seen Supremacy, the second one. I think I've seen Ultimatum, but I don't recall. And I remember almost nothing about them. I do. We didn't talk a ton about the actual like camera work and stuff. We did a little bit more in the prequel than we did in the actual episode. But I do agree because we got it right around the time of this and after this, mainly because of the first Bourne movie, or it was one of the big reasons we got a lot of like shaky cam action sequences became like a big thing. And I agree with Patrick here that the way all of the movies that tried to emulate it afterwards, not all of them, but a lot of the movies that tried to emulate it afterwards, and the reason that shaky cam became such like a thing that people complained about, like I've started to complain about eventually, it's like, oh gosh, it's shaky cam action sequences, you can't see anything, is that they weren't done as competently. Because that is a big thing in Bourne, is that even though the camera is shaking a lot, you can still, they do a good job of rooting you within the whatever like environment you're in and making it very clear what is happening throughout a given shot. You never feel lost within the action scene.
That's a problem that I have with action scenes a lot, is feeling lost in them.
And particularly with shaky cam ones, because there's just a blur of things flying around and like fists moving, you know, it's and depending on the lighting and how it's shot, it can be really hard to tell. But that you never, at least in the first movie, you never have that issue. And I think that's a really good point, because it is something that became a huge sort of trend in action movies, is that similar style. But it does add, if you can do it right and do it well, and in the right movie, and again, in a movie where our main character is completely like without bearings and is like lost within his own mind, let alone within the world he's in, that chaotic nature to the camera work sort of informs the character really well. Whereas other movies who copied that, because the Bourne movies were so popular, it doesn't necessarily always fit thematically. And also, if you don't do it really well, it turns into a really confusing mess. And it's a good thing that we've kind of started to get away from that again, at least in really well done action films. Like the John Wick movies don't. There's a lot of chaotic camera movement, but it's not the sort of not the similar type of like shaky cam sort of
do you think we'll see a trend cycle reemergence of the shaky cam?
It's never gone away. It's still used in movies. It's still used, and again, it's one of those things that a lot of times it's used. I think it's one of those techniques that can be used by lesser skilled filmmakers to try to hide weaker choreography. Like not even lesser skilled filmmakers, but less. If you're making an action film and your choreography, your fight choreography and stuff, or your stunt talent or whoever's doing it isn't as talented, you can hide more with a shaky camera.
Yeah.
Like you can get away with a little bit less talented performers and choreo if your camera's moving around like crazy and cutting constantly, like it's easy to hide stuff. Whereas if you have, you know, really talented stunt performers or really talented fight choreographers and stuff, like if you go back and watch Jackie Chan movies, there's a reason that the camera's just on a wide and sits on one shot, because him and all of his stunt people are so incredibly talented that it's way more impressive just to watch them do the things they're doing, and you don't have to hide anything. But because it's abused by filmmakers and stuff that know that okay, we can get away by hiding some of this if we move the camera around sort of chaotically, it tends to be really noticeable, like a bad wig. Like when it's done poorly, it's very noticeable. But when done well, it still works. It's just, it is interesting.
So on Instagram, we had a little snafu on Instagram this week. The movie got 91% of the vote and the book got 9%. But I don't have an actual count, because apparently if you wait too long to go back and look at the story, Instagram disappears that information.
There you go.
So now we know.
We usually get a fair number of votes.
Yeah.
So it's probably like 20 votes, and it was like 19-1 or wait.
I mean, the
right
movie
math?
clearly smashed here.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many total votes we got. We did have one comment on my regular feed post. Gareth Matthews.author replied to our post with 3 clapping emojis.
I believe it's Gareth.
Gareth?
Or Garrett H. Matthews,
Gareth?
but it looks like Gareth to me. Anyway, sorry. Yes, they
He
replied.
replied with 3 clapping emojis, which I guess was in support of my call that the movie was better.
It seems like it.
I don't think they were trying to clap back because
No.
there was no additional information. So if it was a clap back, it was not a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. So final numbers, where'd we end up at?
We don't technically have a count thanks to Instagram, but I think we can pretty safely give this one to the movie, considering that it won by a landslide on all 3 platforms.
There you go. All right. According to you all, Bourne Identity, the movie is better. But we appreciate everybody's feedback. Really cool. We had some interesting stuff that time. Lots of different kind of points to discuss, and that was fun. So now it is time for us to learn a little bit about posthumous publication.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
So posthumous publication is exactly what it sounds like. It is the practice of publishing a book after the author has died. Many discussions about posthumous publications start with Tolkien. Mm-hmm. When J.R.R. died in 1973, he left 4 full-length unpublished novels and a whole bunch of other uncollected papers and things behind. And his youngest son, Christopher, who actually died very recently, he passed in January 2020, spent almost half his lifetime annotating that work and preparing it for publication. And those include a few titles that I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation on. History of Middle-earth.
I think you nailed that one.
I got that one. Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin, and the Silmarillion. Silmarillion.
I normally hear it pronounced without the first L. Like, even though it's there, like, I normally hear it's Silmarillion, but I don't know if that's correct. I just normally hear it that way.
I think is still getting adapted by, like, Amazon.
Well, okay, so
we don't need to get into that.
Yeah, the Silmarillion, from what I understand, and I've never read it, it's very long. Is essentially like
it's like the Middle Earth Bible.
It's got tons of stories from Middle Earth in ages past, and they are adapting a certain time period from earlier, like the Second Age or the First Age. I can't remember what age they're doing on the Amazon show, but so the Lord of the Rings, the movies take place during, and the books take place during the Third Age, I believe. Yes, the Third Age. And this is from one of the previous like, epochs in Middle Earth. So
but it covers like a lot of like the lore and the setting up Middle Earth.
And the which we talked a little bit in our Lord of the Rings episodes about like the sort of creatures that like Gandalf is and the gods essentially of the universe of Middle Earth and the angels and stuff, and it's very complicated and I know very little about it, but yeah, that's what the Silmarillion, a lot of it covers. Right.
So we have all of that stuff because of Christopher Tolkien, who essentially acted as the keeper of his father's legacy, which is kind of a best case scenario, because the ethics of posthumous publication can often be a really gray area. Typically, the writing will fall into the hands of the family or maybe an agent or a lawyer, and from there they can essentially do whatever they like with it because it's an intellectual estate. Now, some authors will stipulate either in an official will or otherwise, maybe it's just something that they've said a lot or written down somewhere that they do not want their work or certain items to be published. For example, basically all of Emily Dickinson's poems and letters were published posthumously after she told her sister Lavinia to destroy her work after her death. Now, obviously, Lavinia did not honor that wish.
Lavinia wanted to get paid.
And it's because of that we have the collected works of one of the most famous and prolific American poets.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, posthumous publication can actually bring fame to a deceased author. For example, Henry David Thoreau was never famous during his lifetime. He never made it. But after he died, he kind of skyrocketed. John Kennedy Toole's A Confederacy of Dunces was released 11 years after his death, and it won a Pulitzer Prize, despite the fact that the author was constantly getting rejected during his lifetime. And on the flip side of that, you have examples like Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, Lee often stated throughout her lifetime that To Kill a Mockingbird would be the only book she published, but in 2015, Go Set a Watchman was released. Do you remember this?
I remember this.
This was a big controversy.
The infamously terrible sequel to
Well, hang on now.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
So this is not technically an example of posthumous publication because Lee passed in 2016, but I wanted to include it partly because it is recent and more people are going to remember this, but I also think it's a good example of how ignoring an author's wishes can cause harm. Mm-hmm. And full disclosure, while I have read To Kill a Mockingbird, I did not read Go Set a Watchman, so I'm going off of reviews here and things that other people have said.
Okay.
So the novel was marketed as a sequel to Mockingbird, but it later became pretty obvious that Watchmen was, in fact, a first draft of Lee's most famous novel. It was something that she wrote and then set aside and kind of revamped the whole story, which is what got us To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, Watchmen, as you alluded to, was not particularly well received, with many critics noting that it read like exactly what it was, a first draft. And many readers were also upset by the characterization of Atticus Finch, who is very much the moral center of Mockingbird, but a completely different character in Watchmen. And the fact that it was marketed as a sequel did damage to the legacy of To Kill a Mockingbird and to some extent the legacy of Lee herself. Mm-hmm. Now, the publication of Watchmen also raised a lot of questions about the ethics of the whole situation, with many pointing out that it seemed like Lee's lawyer, Tonya Carter, had been kind of sitting on the manuscript and waiting for the right moment to pounce. There was definitely some shady stuff that happened, most notably Carter waiting to put publication into motion until after the death of Lee's sister Alice, who was her primary caregiver and who was in charge of Lee's affairs. Of that situation, New York Times columnist Joe Nocera wrote, "A publisher that cared about Harper Lee's legacy would have taken those words to heart and declined to publish Go Set a Watchman, the idea that Lee eventually transformed into a gem. That HarperCollins decided instead to manufacture a phony literary event isn't surprising. It's just sad."
Yep.
So posthumous publication, I think it raises a lot of interesting ethical questions. Like, obviously, the Diary of Anne Frank is an important historical document, but, like, is it ethical to publish a 13-year-old's diary without her consent?
Yeah.
And I think it's one thing to publish a fully formed manuscript, but the lines start to get really blurry when it comes to things like drafts and notes and personal writing like journals and letters.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting because it's definitely what I mean. Obviously, and this is again obvious that like certain things like okay, they were basically done with the book. It was going through revisions, and they died during the editing process. We're gonna finish some revisions with somebody close to them, a friend, whatever, somebody that even if that's not somebody that like they were like they never said maybe they died unexpectedly or something, but it's like okay, we're gonna wrap this up and publish it because they clearly wanted to publish it, and we're planning to publish it, and it just didn't make it to that. That's an obvious like okay, sure, yeah, that probably fine, even though you didn't get express consent from them to like publish it. posthumously. It seems, they were on the journey to publish it. Other things, obviously, a little more complicated. If maybe they weren't ever planning on publishing it or something like that. Yeah. And then even more complicated with, like you mentioned, things like the Diary of Anne Frank and stuff.
Like when it has historical significance or when it's ephemera from an important writer.
Yeah.
Like all of Virginia Woolf's diaries are published,
Right.
What are the ethics of that?
It is... Boy, it is complicated. I'd be interested to talk, I'd be interested to hear somebody who's maybe thought about that specific topic more. I'm inclined, first blush, and this is not at all a super thought out stance. It's just sort of my first blush thinking about it. Unless there is expressed, unless the person has expressed explicit wishes for it not to be published to people and they're aware of that, I think I'm mostly okay with it, specifically because, to me, it has a lot to do with I don't know, maybe not, I don't know. It is complicated, but I would tend to say sure, if I die and I had something that I was writing that somebody wants to publish, fine. Generally speaking, unless it's something really weird and specific, it is a little weird, publishing somebody's diary.
Yeah.
In particular, again, mentioning the Anne Frank one, that's a very interesting, because it's so many intersecting angles of okay, it's a
it's a
child. It's a child who's writing an explicitly personal thing.
Yeah.
And but it's about a very important historical event. And there's a lot of layers there that are incredibly complicated, and I don't think we're gonna come down one side or the other whether or not that was a morally correct thing to do, but to publish that. But I don't know. It is interesting.
So I'm really interested to hear what our listeners think about posthumous publication. Good, bad, somewhere in the middle. Maybe we need to take it case by case.
I think I think ultimately I land on it's case by case, and it's super complicated. Because there is even an argument to be made that something could be immoral. You're definitely committing some level of an immoral act by publishing Anne Frank's diary. I think inherently there's probably some argument to be made that it is, you're violating her privacy, you're violating her consent and putting her words out there. It is all posthumously, so you're not actively violating their consent in any way. It's a little different, but still, but that may, in fact, be outweighed by, that moral transgression may, in fact, be outweighed by the effect that the actual publication has on the world. The sort of humanization of somebody going through the Holocaust and their experience with it, and the light that shed on that human experience and the suffering experienced, and maybe the way that makes all the people who read it a little more sympathetic, a little more sort of cognizant, and a little more looking out for maybe we shouldn't be committing genocides or whatever. You get what I'm saying? That may in fact outweigh that initial moral transgression.
Yeah, I sure wish we'd learned that.
Right. I'm not saying we have. I'm just saying that I think yeah, I know. But I think that you could make that argument that the ultimate good that the book has done outweighs that initial moral transgression. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and I do think it's interesting because you can have two cases that appear very similar. Like I mentioned Emily Dickinson and then also Harper Lee, both of whom had explicitly said I don't want you to publish any more of my stuff.
Right.
And Emily Dickinson, obviously I'm glad that we have the collected works of Emily Dickinson, but for Harper Lee, it turned out kind of disastrous.
Right. And that's another thing. The effects of it, the consequences of it are also play into like how we grade it. Because again, I would say the same thing about Anne Frank. If somehow Anne Frank's the publication of her diary, which was already I think morally dubious at best, by publishing it, if the outcome of that was bad in some way, like if it had a net negative effect on the world on top of the initial moral transgression, then obviously yes, that's like not good.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, we would look at that very differently if somehow it had a net bad effect.
Yeah, and I guess it's impossible to know what its net effect on the world is, but it does seem like, at least taking the vibe of the thing and the temperature of the Diary of Anne Frank and the effect it's had on the people that have read it and stuff, it feels like it's probably had a net positive effect in terms of bringing humanizing and sort of not even humanizing, what's the word, like localized, like giving us a very specific viewpoint into this period of history in a way that is very affecting and hopefully makes people again more compassionate, more empathetic, and more on guard for things like being a passive part of a genocide. We know that's not necessarily it's not like fixing people, but it is maybe hopefully having a net positive effect. Anyways, super fascinating, complicated topic. We know a moral philosopher. We may have to get him on to discuss the morality of posthumous publication, because that could be interesting. All right, let's go ahead now and preview Radio Free Albemuth, the book.
I've had the strangest feeling. I've been asleep my whole life, waiting for something to happen.
Maybe they're just ordinary dreams.
I think I'm being programmed in my sleep.
Just because I write science fiction doesn't mean I believe in this stuff. I don't even think flying saucers are real.
The Cold War may be over. The secret organization, Ramcheck, is still committed to undermining our democratic institutions.
Only way you get him out of the Oval Office is in a casket.
So I did try to figure out how to pronounce Albemuth.
Yeah.
And I found an interview with the director of the movie, and the person interviewing him pronounced it Albemuth.
Albemuth.
Which I think is what we're going with.
That's what I'm going with, Albemuth.
And then in the movie trailer, Alanis Morissette's character pronounces it Albemuth. Which
like moo, like a cow.
Yeah, maybe the Canadian pronunciation.
It's funny because that wasn't my other option. Mine was Albemuth or Albemuth.
Yeah.
And she didn't say muth, she said muth, which is different.
Yeah.
And worse.
I'm telling you, it's Canadian.
It might be the Canadian version.
So Radio Free Albemuth is a dystopian novel by Philip K. Dick. It was written in 1976, and it was published posthumously, which is why we talked about it.
It would be hilarious if it wasn't. We just randomly.
But it was published posthumously in 1985. It was originally titled Valis System A, and it was his first attempt to kind of work through his experiences that he had in early 1974 when he experienced some hallucinations following the use of painkillers after some dental work.
This is the time period where Philip K. Dick thought he was chatting with God.
Yeah. Apparently it made a big impression on him.
Yeah.
But his publishers requested extensive rewrites of the novel, and he ended up canning that project, and he reworked it kind of as part of the Valis trilogy. He incorporated the plot line of Radio Free Albemuth as a backdrop film in that trilogy. But Arbor House acquired the rights to Radio Free Albemuth in 1985, which was 3 years after his death in 1982. They then published an edition under the current title, prepared from a corrected typescript, which was given by Dick to his friend Tim Powers, another science fiction writer. The word Albemuth was derived by Dick from the Arabic word Albemuth, which means the whale.
Oh.
And that is itself a reference to Fomalhaut, which is a star. It is the star that Dick at one time believed the entity of Valis came from in real life.
Interesting.
Back when he was talking to God.
Yeah, back when he was
painkillers.
chatting with
Yes.
with Valis, which is a sort of god, kind of.
Yeah, kind of. When it was published, Kirkus Reviews called the novel well-constructed, absorbing at first, later somberly single-minded, a bleak and utterly depressing statement. Very excited to continue reading this. And Publishers Weekly said, though not one of Dick's best novels, it is an engrossing, non-stop excursion into a believable vision of hell.
Interesting.
The reviews that I saw of this, I saw a couple little other snippets, were generally kind of mixed.
Yeah.
Like some people were like, whoa, this is really great. And other people were like, this is very clearly a first draft.
That makes sense. I don't think Philip K. Dick wrote anything that was like terrible. Probably this is when you're that talented. Is probably even his first drafts were probably had a lot of interesting stuff going on. So like it doesn't surprise me that the reviews on something like this were like, yeah. Some people were like, oh great. Other people were like,
Yeah. I made it like 3 chapters in before I like went to find you and was like, you're going to want to read this one.
Yeah.
I didn't read A Scanner Darkly, but based on watching the movie and like listening to you and Aaron talk about it, this feels a little bit more in the vein of like A Scanner Darkly than it does something like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or Minority Report.
Yeah, it does feel, and neither of us are Dick scholars.
No, certainly not.
Aaron would be the closest that we know to that probably, and he would not even claim that title, I'm sure. But it does feel from the handful of PKD stuff that we've done that there's almost like 2 distinct PKD oeuvres.
Yeah.
There's
like 2 branches.
Yeah, there
are 2 wolves inside him.
Yeah, it feels like, and they may be split temporarily or they may not be. It seems like they are in fact probably split a little more temporally. Like the earlier PKD stuff is a little more like hard sci-fi, with lots of philosophical. I mean, all of this stuff is incredibly like rich philosophically, but a little more hard sci-fi, a little more sort of interesting philosophical questions wrapped up in like hard sci-fi stories. And then some of his later stuff gets a little bit more once he'd done a lot more drugs, which he was already doing quite a bit back then, I believe. But some of his later stuff like this, like A Scanner Darkly, which is a little bit later than I think. I could be wrong about that. Gets a little more psychedelic, a little more I don't want to navel gazy sounds dismissive, but a little more
like experimental,
out there and experimental potentially, while still covering similar topics and it's still being very clearly like a sci-fi, but it just a little different. It's interesting. It is Philip K. Dick. He's a guy. He's a guy that wrote some books. All right, let's go ahead now and find out a little bit about Radio Free Albemuth, the movie.
Super secret cabal of evil revolutionaries. It's a figment of his imagination.
Government declares war on a terrorist organization that doesn't even exist.
We're inclined to believe that you staged this break-in yourself.
With any luck, this thing will just blow over.
Not likely. Once the authorities open up a file on someone, they never close it.
Life on this planet came from the star system called Albemuth. The satellite serves as our link back. But this invasion is for our benefit, Nick. You and I and the others were chosen.
You are the only woman I've ever loved.
Then what are you doing?
You're having a sexual affair with Miss Ramchak.
Whether I am or not is my business.
It's not too late for you. If I'm going down with people I love. Here's to subversion.
The authorities are looking for something subversive to show up in his books. But the fact is, we have a better chance to get a message out in a song.
Radio Free Albemuth is a 2010 film written and directed and produced by John Allen Simon. This is his only writing and directing credit. The film stars Jonathan Scarfe, Shea Wiggum, Alanis Morissette, as you mentioned earlier. Catherine Winnick, which you may know from Vikings. Or that movie we did on Good, Bad, or Bad one time.
I forgot she was in that. Was that Satan's Little Helper?
Satan's Little Helper, which I believe has been copyright claimed and is no longer available, unfortunately. Scott Wilson, Hannah R. Hall, Ashley Green, Rosemary Harris, John Tenney, Rich Sumner, I can't remember, Summer, I think, and Joel McKinnon Miller, who Joel McKinnon Miller, most people know from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He's one of the two dumb ones. I can't remember their names, but it's been a while.
It's Scott Wilson, because when I looked up the cast,
Scott Wilson is Herschel from The Walking Dead.
I was squinting at him. I was like, I know that guy's face.
Yes, Scott Wilson.
It's been so long since we watched The Walking Dead.
Yeah, he's Herschel from The Walking Dead, and Rich Summer was in Mad Men among a bunch of other things, but. He was also in Glow. Rich Summer was Allison Brie's boyfriend in like the first season or husband or whatever.
Yeah.
That's Rich Summer. So some people who've been in things. It's not like a cast of nobodies. There's some people in it. The movie has a 33% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a 35 out of 100 on Metacritic, and a 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb. This is a fun one. The film made $9,365 at the box office. That's according to Wikipedia. I don't know how accurate that is, but yeah. So here's a little bit. There's not a lot out there about this movie because it is a small movie that didn't get a big release and that sort of thing. So there's not a ton of like background information, but I was able to find a little bit. In 2004, Utopia Pictures and Television acquired the rights to 3 Philip K. Dick novels, including Radio Free Albemuth. The writer, director, producer Simon said that the film was originally going to be released under the title Valis. He explained, quote, "The script is based at this point almost entirely on Radio Free Albemuth. The financiers like the title Valis better, so that's the tentative title. Since Radio Free Albemuth is essentially the first draft of Valis, which is what you mentioned earlier, we ended up with the rights to both. From the estate of Philip K. Dick." He then went on to say, quote, "If Radio Free Albemuth is successful, Valis the book would form the basis for the sequel to Valis the movie."
Boy.
In other words, the story of Valis would form the basis for Valis 2. Now, that all being said, the movie did not come out under the title Valis. It came out under the title Radio Free Albemuth. My guess for that, and I was not able to find anything, is that once some higher-ups saw the film and said, well, we're not getting a sequel. Maybe they still wanted to do something with Valis and didn't want to tie this to it, is my guess. Is they were like, this will be its own movie.
Probably a pretty good guess.
Yeah, we don't care anymore. It's bad. Who knows if it's bad or not? I'm just saying that's probably what they thought, would be my guess, as why it's called Radio Free Albemuth and not Valis. So the movie was filmed in October of 2007. And had been stuck in post-production hell for 3 years, till 2010. They then showed an incomplete cut to independent film festivals, and then a successful Kickstarter campaign in 2013 eventually raised funds to give the film a very limited theatrical release.
Oh, the glory days of Kickstarter.
Yes.
2013.
So in production hell for 3 years, or post-production hell for 3 years, and then another 3 years before it got a theatrical release. Thanks to Kickstarter, and then it made $9,000. So it got that Kickstarter theatrical release probably put it in like a few theaters for a weekend or something for it to make $9,000. So as I said, they filmed it in October 2007, and during that filming were some of the worst fires in LA County history at the time. And that affected their filming locations and scheduling, and they ended up having to find replacement locations for a lot of the filming because of the fires that were going on. They weren't able to shoot where they originally wanted to. This is random but fun. Colin Farrell apparently frequently visited the set to hang out with his buddy Shea Wiggum. Just showing up. I mean, he was in Minority Report like a year or two before this. So he was in a Philip K. Dick, if not at least one. I mean, I think Minority Report was the only one he's in, because he's not in Scanner Darkly. Yeah. But anyways. Apparently he's friends with Shea Wiggum. So some critics' opinions on Radio Free Albemuth. This is fun. Jeanette Katsoulis dismissed the film's, quote, stiff staging and so-so special effects in the New York Times before concluding, quote, the excellent Shea Wiggum as a science fiction writer is our guide and narrator, but even his gravitas won't keep you from laughing at an extraterrestrial who thinks that hiding subliminal messages in pop songs is the way to start a revolution. End quote. So Jeanette was not a fan. And Shea Wiggum does play Philip K. Dick. So I don't know why they didn't... This author wrote the excellent Shea Wiggum as a science fiction writer. Okay.
Maybe she didn't
say Philip K. Dick. His name's Philip K. Dick. He's not a science fiction writer. He's like one of the science fiction writers, but sure. Richard Kuipers of Variety called it, quote, an engrossing adaptation that operates successfully as a study of enlightenment and a straight-ahead conspiracy thriller. So Richard Variety liked it, or their critic liked it. John DeFore of the Hollywood Reporter wrote, quote, though it echoes A Scanner Darkly in a few pleasing ways, Albemuth is a substantially less satisfying affair, one whose longueurs and deliberately cheesy effects, deliberately with a question mark, saying, I don't know, maybe they're intentionally bad, and deliberately cheesy effects work will alienate all but Dick's hardcore devotees. How do you say that word? Devotees?
I would have said devotees, but I
think
don't
it's
know.
devotees. Devotees.
Here.
Wow, now I'm really blanking on how to say that word. Wow, I feel like both of those sound right in my head.
Devotee.
Yeah, see, devotees.
Devotee.
There you go. And finally, Gary Goldstein of the Los Angeles Times called it, quote, a sluggish, often cheesy sci-fi thriller.
Interesting.
So those are the reviews of Radio Free Albemuth going in, but we're going to withhold judgment and see what we think of it. I like a lot of the actors that are in it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I've ever seen Alanis Morissette in anything that isn't Dogma. She's in Dogma, right? I'm pretty sure she's in Dogma.
I don't think I've ever seen her in anything. I've never seen Dogma.
Pretty sure she's in Dogma. And other than that, I don't think I've ever seen her in anything other than music videos. So I'm interested to see. But the other people, Rich Summers, good and stuff. Shea Wiggum from the stuff I've seen him in is good. Scott Wilson's good. Joel McKinnon Miller, I've only ever seen him in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I don't know who Jonathan Scarf is, or Scarfy, or however you pronounce it. But I'm excited to watch it. But where can you watch it? That's an important question. As always, check your local library, or if you still have a local video rental store, go check with them. You can stream it with a subscription to Prime Video or Hoopla. So this one's easy for us. Mm-hmm. Prime Video. I don't know what Hoopla is. I've never heard of that. That's either. A new one. You can also stream it with ads on Tubi. So that's even easier. Free. You can watch it with ads on Tubi. Or you can rent it for $3 to $5 on Vudu, Fandango Now, Apple TV, etc. Probably YouTube TV, all those places, if I had to guess. But yeah. Radio Free Albemuth is our next episode. I read a little bit of a synopsis just to kind of see, and I'm excited. The first sentence or two of the synopsis that did like the world building felt very prophetic.
Yes.
Like I was like, oh boy, Philip K. Dick out here predicting the future.
I don't know if he was talking to God, but he might have been seeing into the future.
Yeah. Again, from the first sentence or two that I read, I was like, interesting. Yeah, that was. I'm excited to watch it, even though it's supposedly not a particularly great movie, but it still should be very interesting. So.
And maybe we can have a little bit of fun razzing on it if it's not that good.
As well. Maybe we got some fun, cheesy effects to talk about. So we'll be discussing Radio Free Albemuth in 1 week's time. And until that time, guys, gals, non-binary, everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.